The world is a complex and often chaotic place. To navigate it, we create narratives. We tell ourselves stories to make sense of the noise, to find patterns in the randomness, to impose order on the fundamentally unpredictable nature of human history. The official narrative is the one we are taught in school, the one we read in the headlines, the one delivered to us by governments and institutions. It is a story of progress, of cause and effect, of events that, for the most part, have rational and straightforward explanations. This is the world as it is presented to us, solid, knowable, and more or less as it seems. But there is another story, a counter-narrative that whispers from the margins, that lurks in declassified documents, that echoes in the testimony of whistleblowers and the lingering questions of unsolved tragedies. This story suggests that the world is not as it seems. It suggests that beneath the surface of official history there is another hidden history, one shaped not by accident or incompetence, but by deliberate, secret design. This is the world of conspiracy theories. The term itself is often used dismissively, as a label for fringe ideas, paranoia, and a refusal to accept simple facts. And to be sure, that world is filled with baseless speculation and fantastical thinking. But to dismiss all conspiracy theories is to ignore a crucial and uncomfortable truth. Sometimes they are real. Sometimes the most paranoid-sounding plots, the most sinister-seeming unexplained events, turn out to be not just plausible, but documented fact. Sometimes, the secret cabals and shadowy government agencies are not figments of a fevered imagination, but provable realities. Tonight, we are going to peel back the curtain. We are going to venture beyond the official story and into the shadows to examine four of the most compelling, most disturbing, and most plausible conspiracy theories of the modern era. These are not stories about lizard people or flat Earth. These are theories grounded in evidence, supported by expert testimony, and fueled by official documents that were once stamped top secret. We will explore a CIA program of mind control so horrific it sounds like a science fiction nightmare, but was terrifyingly real. We will question the official story of a plane crash that claimed the life of a United Nations Secretary General and may have altered the fate of a continent. We will delve into the possibility that a powerful, unelected network, a kind of deep state, operates beyond the reach of democracy. And we will look at a modern-day tragedy that is shrouded in so much mystery and contradiction that it has become a breeding ground for some of the most persistent theories of our time. This is not an exercise in paranoia. It is an exercise in critical thinking. It is an exploration of the moments when the official story frays at the edges, when the facts don't quite add up, and when the terrifying possibility emerges that the truth is far darker and more complex than we have been led to believe. Our first exploration into the world where conspiracy became fact must begin with a name that has become synonymous with the darkest capabilities of government secrecy. It is a name that represents a proven, factual conspiracy so vast and so morally bankrupt that it remains shocking to this day. This is the story of Project MKUltra. If you were to write a screenplay about a rogue intelligence agency using drugs, hypnosis, and psychological torture on its own citizens in a mad quest to create a mind-controlled assassin, it would be dismissed as pulp fiction, as airport thriller paranoia. Yet, that is precisely what the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States did for nearly 2 decades under the codename MKUltra. The story begins in the early 1950s at the height of the Cold War. The CIA was a young and deeply paranoid organization. They were obsessed with the idea that the Soviets, the Chinese, and the North Koreans had developed sophisticated brainwashing techniques. They had seen American prisoners of war in Korea give strange, coerced confessions, and they were terrified of falling behind in a new kind of war, a war for the human mind. Out of this fear, Project MKUltra was born. Its official, sanitized objective was to study mind control, behavior modification, and interrogation techniques. Its real, unspoken objective was far more sinister: to see if a human being could be turned into a programmable puppet, an unwitting assassin, a Manchurian candidate. The program was the brainchild of CIA Director Allen Dulles and was run by a brilliant but ruthless chemist named Sidney Gottlieb, who would become known as the CIA's poisoner-in-chief. Under Gottlieb's direction, MKUltra became a sprawling, hydra-headed monster, encompassing more than 150 sub-projects at over 80 different institutions. They operated through front organizations, funding research at prestigious universities like Harvard and Columbia, at hospitals, and in prisons. The top scientists and doctors in the country, many of whom had no idea their work was being funded by the CIA, were enlisted in this secret war. The primary tool of MKUltra was a drug, lysergic acid diethylamide, or LSD. The CIA became obsessed with the reality-shattering potential of LSD. They believed it could be the key to breaking down a personality and rebuilding it in their own image. And to test its effects, they needed human guinea pigs. They did not ask for volunteers. The agency began to dose thousands of people with LSD without their knowledge or consent. They slipped it into the drinks of their own agents at office parties, just to see what would happen. One such victim was a CIA biochemist and biological warfare specialist named Frank Olson. In 1953, at a secret agency retreat, Gottlieb spiked Olson's after-dinner drink with a massive dose of LSD. Olson, who had no idea what was happening to him, plunged into a deep state of paranoia and psychosis. 9 days later, he fell to his death from the 13th-story window of his New York hotel room. The CIA ruled it a suicide, a tragic nervous breakdown. For decades, his family believed this official story. It was a lie. Frank Olson was one of MKUltra's first and most public casualties. But the agency's experiments were not confined to their own ranks. They went out into the public. In an operation codenamed Midnight Climax, the CIA set up brothels in New York and San Francisco. These were safe houses where government-hired prostitutes would lure unsuspecting men. Behind two-way mirrors, CIA agents would sit in armchairs, sipping cocktails, and watch as their test subjects were dosed with LSD and other drugs. They took detailed notes on their reactions, observing their behavior as their minds unraveled. The subjects were ordinary citizen students, soldiers, sailors, civil servants, none of whom ever knew they were pawns in a secret government experiment. They simply thought they were having a very strange, very bad night. The program's experiments were not limited to drugs. They explored every conceivable avenue of psychological assault. They funded research into hypnosis, sensory deprivation, verbal and sexual abuse, and electronic brain stimulation. One of the most notorious subprojects was run by a Canadian psychiatrist named Dr. Ewan Cameron at McGill University in Montreal. Dr. Cameron believed he could de-pattern the human brain, essentially erase a person's memories and personality, and then repattern it with new information. His test subjects were ordinary Canadian citizens who had come to his institute for minor psychological issues like anxiety or postpartum depression. Dr. Cameron subjected them to a horrific regimen of what can only be described as torture. He would put them into chemically induced comas for weeks or even months at a time. While they were comatose, he would subject them to massive electroshock treatments, sometimes at 30 to 40 times the normal therapeutic dosage. He would then play looped audio messages to them for days on end, simple, repetitive phrases in an attempt to brainwash them. The results were catastrophic. His patients did not emerge repatterned. They emerged as broken human beings. Many suffered permanent amnesia, unable to remember their own children or their past lives. Some were reduced to an infantile state, having to be retaught how to speak and use the toilet. The CIA, through a front organization, funded Dr. Cameron's work, seeing it as a valuable, if extreme, part of their research. For 20 years, MKUltra operated in the deepest shadows, a completely illegal and unethical black ops program, unknown to the American public and even to most of Congress. It was a real-life conspiracy run by a real-life deep state apparatus within the CIA, accountable to no one. The truth only came to light in the 1970s, thanks to the work of the Church Committee, a Senate committee tasked with investigating abuses by U.S. intelligence agencies. When the committee began to ask questions, the then CIA director, Richard Helms, ordered that all files related to MKUltra be destroyed. It was a deliberate criminal act of obstruction. However, a clerical error saved some of the documents. A box of financial records, some 20,000 pages, had been misfiled. These financial records, though heavily redacted, provided the committee with the skeleton key to unlock the conspiracy. They contained the names of the researchers, the universities, the hospitals. When the story broke, it was a bombshell. The public was horrified. The idea that their own government had been using them as unwitting lab rats in a quest for mind control was the stuff of the wildest conspiracy theories. But the evidence was undeniable. The CIA was forced to admit the program's existence. Survivors of Dr. Cameron's experiments came forward, telling their heartbreaking stories. Frank Olson's family had his body exhumed, and a second autopsy revealed that his death was more likely a homicide than a suicide, suggesting he may have been thrown from that window to silence him. Project MKUltra is not a theory. It is a fact. It is a chilling, documented case study in how far a secret government agency is willing to go in the name of national security. It proves that the most paranoid-sounding fears about government overreach can sometimes be entirely justified. And it serves as a dark and necessary preamble to our next story because it establishes a crucial precedent that powerful people in secret rooms are capable of orchestrating events that the public would find unbelievable, including, perhaps, the assassination of a world leader. Our second story takes us to the heart of Africa, to the year 1961, a time of immense geopolitical turmoil. The Cold War was not just being fought between Washington and Moscow, it was a global chess match, and the newly independent nations of Africa were the pawns. In the center of this chessboard was the Congo, a nation rich in minerals, particularly uranium, the key ingredient for nuclear weapons. It was a prize that both the United States and the Soviet Union were desperate to control. And into this maelstrom stepped a man of principle, a man who believed in a different path for Africa. His name was Dag Hammarskjöld, and he was the Secretary General of the United Nations. Hammarskjöld was a Swedish diplomat, an idealist who believed passionately in the mission of the UN. He was trying to broker a peace in the Congo, which had descended into civil war after its independence from Belgium. The mineral-rich province of Katanga had seceded, backed by powerful Western mining interests and a force of ruthless European mercenaries. Hammarskjöld was flying into the region to negotiate a ceasefire. He was a threat to the powerful financial and political forces that wanted to keep the Congo destabilized and its resources under their control. On the night of September 18, 1961, the plane carrying Dag Hammarskjöld and 15 other people, a Douglas DC-6, was on its final approach to the airport in Ndola, northern Rhodesia, now Zambia. It never arrived. The plane crashed in the forest just a few miles from the runway. There was only one survivor, an American security officer named Harold Julian, who was severely burned and died a few days later. Dag Hammarskjöld, the man who was trying to bring peace to the Congo, was dead. The official investigation conducted by the colonial Rhodesian authorities was swift and conclusive. They ruled the crash a result of pilot error. They claimed the pilot had simply misjudged his altitude on the nighttime approach and flown the plane into the trees. It was a tragic accident. Case closed. For decades, this was the official story. But from the very beginning, it was a story that was full of holes, a narrative that seemed designed to conceal rather than to reveal. The questions and inconsistencies began to pile up, fueling one of the most persistent and compelling assassination conspiracy theories of the 20th century, that Dag Hammarskjöld's plane was deliberately brought down. Let's look at the evidence that contradicts the official story. First, the search for the plane was inexplicably delayed. The plane went missing just after midnight, but a serious search operation was not launched for more than 15 hours, even though the crash site was only a few miles from the airport. Local charcoal burners who lived near the site reported seeing a bright flash in the sky and hearing an explosion on the night of the crash. They tried to lead authorities to the area, but they were ignored. This long delay meant that any survivors, including Hammarskjöld himself, who may have initially survived the crash, would have died from their injuries before help could arrive. Why the delay? Was it incompetence, or was it deliberate, to ensure there would be no inconvenient witnesses? Second, the testimony of the lone survivor, Harold Julian, directly contradicts the pilot error theory. Before he died, he spoke to doctors and police. He told them that just before the crash, there had been a sudden, bright explosion. The plane blew up, he said. His words were dismissed by the official inquiry as the ramblings of a dying, confused man. Third, multiple eyewitnesses on the ground reported seeing not one, but two aircraft in the sky that night. They described a smaller, jet-like aircraft that seemed to be shadowing or pursuing Hammarskjöld's DC-6. One witness, a man named Timothy Kankasa, reported seeing the smaller plane fire at the larger one, after which the larger plane caught fire and fell from the sky. And then there is the physical evidence from the crash site itself. Photographs of the wreckage show what appear to be bullet holes in the fuselage. Several of the bodies, including Hammarskjöld's, were found with strange objects on or near them. Hammarskjöld himself was found lying peacefully, almost posed, some distance from the main wreckage with an ace of spades playing card tucked into his collar. The Ace of Spades was a known, if theatrical, calling card used by some CIA-backed mercenaries at the time, a symbol of death. Was this a message? The theory that the plane was shot down is not just based on circumstantial evidence. In recent years, declassified documents and new whistleblower testimony have added significant weight to the conspiracy. A commission of inquiry, launched in 2015, uncovered a trove of previously secret documents from the archives of the United States, Britain, Belgium, and South Africa. These documents reveal that Western intelligence agencies were intensely monitoring Hammarskjöld's flight. The U.S. National Security Agency, NSA, intercepted radio transmissions from the cockpit of a second plane that night. A former NSA operative, Charles Southall, has gone on the record stating that he was listening to the transmission live from a monitoring post in Cyprus. He heard a pilot's voice say, in a calm, professional tone, "I see a transport plane. It's the Transair DC-6. I'm gonna make a run on it. Yes, it's the plane." This was followed by the sound of cannon fire. Who was in the second plane? The evidence points to a shadowy coalition of interests, Belgian mining companies desperate to protect their control over Katanga's resources, white supremacist mercenary groups from South Africa and Rhodesia who were fighting for the secessionists, and powerful elements within Western intelligence agencies, including the CIA and Britain's MI6, who saw Hammarskjöld as a naive idealist who was getting in the way of their Cold War objectives. A declassified memo from the time, reportedly from CIA Director Alan Dulles, the same man behind MKUltra, states that Hammarskjöld was becoming a nuisance and that he should be removed. The death of Dag Hammarskjöld was not just a plane crash. It was a political assassination that may have changed the course of African history. His death led to the collapse of the UN's peace efforts, the consolidation of power by corrupt, Western-backed dictators, and decades of instability and conflict in the region. The official story of pilot error was a convenient fiction, a cover for a state-sponsored murder. This is no longer a fringe theory. It is a conclusion supported by a mountain of evidence. It is a chilling example of how unexplained events can be deliberately manufactured by a deep state of interconnected corporate, political, and intelligence interests, operating in the shadows to achieve their goals, even if it means murdering one of the world's most prominent peacemakers. The idea of a deep state, a shadow government operating behind the scenes, pulling the strings of power irrespective of who is in the White House or in Congress, is one of the most pervasive and powerful conspiracy theories of our time. For many, it's a paranoid fantasy. But as cases like MKUltra and the Hammarskjöld assassination show, there is a historical basis for this fear. This brings us to our third theory, which is less about a single event and more about a persistent, hidden structure of power. This is the theory of Operation Mockingbird. The theory of Operation Mockingbird alleges that in the early years of the Cold War, the CIA launched a covert campaign to manipulate and control the American media. The goal was to use journalists, both at home and abroad, as propaganda assets. The agency would recruit respected reporters and editors from major news outlets, the New York Times, CBS News, Time magazine, and others, to publish stories that served the CIA's interests, to plant disinformation, and to spy on foreign governments and domestic dissident groups. The media, the so-called Fourth Estate, that is supposed to hold power accountable, would instead become a secret mouthpiece for the intelligence community. Is this just paranoia? Or is there evidence to support it? Once again, we turn to the findings of the 1975 Church Committee. The committee's investigation into the CIA uncovered extensive evidence of the agency's relationship with the press. The final report detailed how the CIA had cultivated relationships with hundreds of American journalists. Some were witting assets, paid informants who knew they were working for the agency. Others were unwitting dupes, journalists who were fed stories by sources they believed were legitimate but who were actually CIA officers planting propaganda. The report described how the CIA had journalists on its payroll, how it funded magazines and news agencies as front organizations, and how it reviewed and sometimes even censored news stories before they were published. Famed Watergate journalist Carl Bernstein, in a 1977 article for Rolling Stone, expanded on the Church Committee's findings. He identified more than 400 American journalists who had secretly carried out assignments for the CIA. The list included some of the most famous and respected names in American journalism. The operation was so pervasive that, as one CIA official reportedly boasted, you could get a journalist cheaper than a good call girl for a couple $100 a month. The CIA has always officially denied the existence of a formal program called Operation Mockingbird, but they have admitted to the practice of using journalists as assets. They claim these were isolated relationships, not a coordinated program of mass manipulation. But for believers in the theory, this is a distinction without a difference. The evidence is clear. For decades, the Central Intelligence Agency was actively engaged in a conspiracy to manipulate the free press. They were shaping the news that Americans read, the stories they believed, and the opinions they formed, all in service of a secret, undemocratic agenda. The implications are staggering. If the most trusted names in news were, at times, acting as agents of the deep state, how can we ever truly trust the official narrative of any major event? The theory of Operation Mockingbird suggests that the conspiracy is not just about isolated events like an assassination or a mind control program. It suggests that the conspiracy is the very lens through which we are taught to see the world. It is a theory that, once considered, forces us to question everything. It is the ultimate paranoid vision, but it is a vision grounded in a disturbing amount of declassified fact. This brings us to our final story, a modern-day tragedy that has become a black hole of competing narratives, a case so saturated with mystery, contradiction, and alleged cover-ups that it has become a canvas onto which 1,000 different conspiracy theories have been painted. This is the mystery of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. On March 8, 2014, a Boeing 777 Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 took off from Kuala Lumpur, bound for Beijing. On board were 227 passengers and 12 crew members. About 40 minutes into the flight, as the plane was passing from Malaysian to Vietnamese airspace over the South China Sea, it vanished. The final verbal communication from the cockpit was a calm, routine sign-off, "Good night, Malaysian 370. A few minutes later, the plane's transponder, the device that broadcasts its identity and altitude to air traffic control, was switched off. A moment after that, the plane disappeared from civilian radar screens. What followed was the most expensive and extensive search operation in aviation history. Ships and planes from dozens of countries scoured the South China Sea, the area where the plane was last seen. They found nothing. No wreckage, no oil slicks, no debris. It was as if a 200-foot-long airliner had simply vanished into thin air. And then the story took a bizarre turn. Military radar and satellite data revealed a shocking truth. MH370 had not crashed in the South China Sea. After its transponder was turned off, the plane had done something unprecedented in aviation history. It had made a sharp, deliberate turn to the west, flying back over the Malaysian peninsula. It then turned south and flew for another 6 to 7 hours deep into the most remote and desolate stretch of the southern Indian Ocean, a place thousands of miles from its intended flight path. The plane was flying on a ghost course, silent and invisible until it is presumed to have run out of fuel and crashed into the ocean. The official conclusion is that this was a mass murder-suicide orchestrated by the plane's captain, Zahari Ahmad Shah. The theory is that he deliberately depressurized the cabin, killing everyone on board, and then flew the plane until it ran out of fuel. Evidence to support this includes the fact that a flight path almost identical to the plane's final ghost flight was found on a flight simulator in the captain's home. But this official story is, for many, deeply unsatisfying. It is a narrative full of holes and unanswered questions which has allowed a host of conspiracy theories to flourish. One of the most persistent theories is that the plane was hijacked, not by terrorists in the traditional sense, but by a state actor or a corporate entity. The motive? The passengers. On board MH370 were 20 employees of Freescale Semiconductor, a technology company working on cutting-edge microchips and electronic warfare technology. Some theorists believe the plane was hijacked to kidnap these engineers and steal their intellectual property. The plane, in this scenario, did not crash. It was flown to a secret location, perhaps the remote U.S. military base at Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean. Proponents of this theory point to the fact that some of the passengers' cell phones continued to ring for days after the plane disappeared, suggesting they were not at the bottom of the ocean. Another theory suggests a fire or a catastrophic technical failure on board. A fire in the electronics bay could have knocked out the plane's communication systems and filled the cockpit with toxic smoke, incapacitating the pilots. The plane would have then flown on autopilot until it ran out of fuel. This would explain the silence, but it doesn't explain the deliberate, precise turns the plane made after it disappeared from radar. And then there are the more outlandish theories. Was the plane shot down accidentally or deliberately by a military force and the subsequent search in the wrong location a massive cover-up? Was it the first victim of a new kind of cyber hijacking where the plane's controls were taken over remotely? Some have even invoked the paranormal, suggesting the plane flew into some kind of atmospheric anomaly or portal, a modern-day Bermuda Triangle incident. The mystery of MH370 is a perfect storm for conspiracy. We have a profoundly unexplained event, a lack of physical evidence, conflicting data, and an official explanation that feels incomplete. It is a void, and human nature abhors a void. We fill it with stories, with theories, with attempts to find order in the ultimate chaos. From the documented reality of Mkultra's mind control, to the state-sponsored assassination of Dag Hammarskjöld, the media manipulation of Operation Mockingbird, and the gaping void of MH370, these stories challenge our sense of a stable, knowable world. They suggest that sometimes the official story is not the whole story. They prove that conspiracies are not just the stuff of fiction. They are a real and powerful force in human history. They are a reminder that the truth is often a closely guarded secret, hidden in plain sight, waiting for those who are willing to look beyond the curtain and ask the uncomfortable questions. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the shadows. I encourage you to do your own research, to read the declassified documents, and to form your own conclusions. Please share your thoughts on these theories in the comments below. If this exploration of the hidden narratives of our world has piqued your interest, please subscribe for more deep dives into the mysteries that lie just beneath the surface of the official story. Until next time, trust your instincts and never stop questioning.